You painted on the side of the RV. First, it was a little cup of pee for drug
Yep.
testing, and it was not getting positive, reviews. I'll say that. And then
Right.
you decided to paint on the side of it. Who's your daddy?
Funny thing with DNA, right? That it's the most dead serious thing in the world when it comes to relationships, right? I'm not talking about find out if I'm 20% Irish or something like that. It's like find out if this kid that I'm raising is actually my son or some things like that, right? Really, most life altering, affecting children, most serious thing. Strangely enough, it's also like it stokes like the humor bone somehow, right? Even the people in the midst of these serious situations, if, there's humor involved because it's I don't know why, right? So that slogan, it just came like talking in the office, hey, who's your daddy, like that kind of thing, and then it was like, all right, let's put it on the side. It was a little risky because I didn't really know if people would take it well, but man, it absolutely people were jumping out of their houses taking they'd see it coming, but I mean it was nuts. And so then the pictures turned into obviously Instagram posts, which turned into without me doing any of it, just you got a ton of social media just like that. And then New York Post came and Daily News, and then of course New York being the media capital of the world, basically, so we got a ton of media also based on that.
Welcome back, everybody. Today's guest has one of the wildest entrepreneurial comeback stories that I've heard in a long time. Imagine this: you're broke, you just turned 40, you're all out of options. Most people would settle for a safe job, but not Jared Rosenthal. Instead, he bought a beat up RV, slapped some paint on the side that said, "Who's your daddy?" and drove straight into controversy, national headlines, and even a VH1 reality TV show. From rock bottom to building Health Street into a tech platform that's now serving over 50,000 companies, all with zero outside funding. Jared's story is raw, it's real, it's ridiculously inspiring. Get ready because this episode is all about bold moves, second chances, and the kind of legacy you can only build when you stop playing it safe. Everybody, welcome Jared Rosenthal of Health Street. I read some of your bio on the website actually. You have a really long, interesting story, man. Like, how did you first get into entrepreneurship?
Oh man, when I was a kid, I was always trying to sell things and start businesses, really. So
Yeah.
I think the first one was writing away to baseball players. I got a book with their home addresses, and I would put in like five little slips that say, "Please send me five signatures," and I would try to sell them for a quarter to kids in school and stuff like that.
No way.
And it had to offset the cost of the stamp or the two stamps. I would have to put a return on. So I don't think I made a lot of money on that, but I was doing driveways in the neighborhood in Jersey, trying to make some money. It's actually some of the most like when I look back on it, I feel like, oh man, I was really happy, even just out there by myself tarring driveways, but it was like making something out of myself that, or just like entrepreneurship is about making something exist that doesn't otherwise exist, like almost like creating a non-human entity, right? And it only, you're like pushing it up a hill. I always had this thought in my head, right? Of just pushing something up a hill until it finally exists, and until it exists, it's gonna roll back downhill, and no one will ever know. And at some point, you make it, and it starts to take on a life of its own, and that's I just love that whole process.
Guys, what an interesting insight, actually. Like, entrepreneurship is about making something exist that previously didn't. Like, it's
Right.
truly like inventing, like, it's creativity at its finest.
Right. Even there's just the act of creating, let's say, a corporation, right, is a non-human entity, right? But it doesn't do anything unless you put your energy and your mental and all the everything else you got to put emotionally into it and start to make it really exist.
Jared, you started businesses as a kid, multiple. You think entrepreneurship is something that you're either born with or you're not?
I really feel that almost everything anybody can do, right? It's just sort of a fundamental philosophy that I have that you're just not born with stuff. Now, of course, you have predilections and passions and things that come from somewhere else, whether that's nature or nurture, But I really think if somebody wants to do something, they can be relentless in their efforts to achieving it. Doesn't mean it's not easier for some people than others. Um, I'm 5'9". I don't think I was gonna play basketball no matter how much I wanted to play, right? So there's
Yeah.
certain, there are certain things that, right? But nevertheless, I really ascribe to the idea that you can develop, and I think, one of the things that I like to focus on for other people when I talk about entrepreneurship is that not necessarily everybody had examples of it and learned it from school or didn't have the educational opportunities, right? So, getting the message out that, yeah, it's possible because it can seem unachievable, right? And
Mm.
entrepreneurship is extremely hard and stressful and all that other stuff, right? So, but if you want it, right, and you can learn it. If you didn't have those examples, you can seek them out on shows like yours and other places to get that modeling of maybe how it's done, give you more confidence.
So I completely agree with you, right? Like everybody is capable of doing anything they want to. The example of I'm a short dude, I wasn't meant to play basketball. There's examples of pro legend NBA
Right.
players that were so
True.
short. And so really you
Yeah.
can do anything you want to. So entrepreneurship can seem pretty daunting for some people. For those, where do you think is the best place to start even?
To start, well, there are people that have sort of passions about something, and they think, all right, I'm gonna start a business, and maybe it's to prove somebody wrong, or like, my parents don't think I can do it, or my wife says I'm crazy, right? So, I think those are dangerous to just jump into those, for those people to just jump into the business if they haven't thought through the rest of it. Because, yeah, those feelings are great. You got to have the passion. Maybe you want to prove someone wrong, right? But you also have to really understand what you're getting into, have a business plan, right? And think through that side of it. Yeah, I think the most common mistake, and one, I've started businesses that failed also, right? Blew my life savings in 2008, I think it was, starting a business because I forgot the one most fundamental thing, which is you have to have something that people are willing to fork over money for if you want it to be a successful business. And if you wait too long to test that uh, presumption, you might run out of money before you ever find out. And so it's such a simple thing. I hate to even say it because everybody probably like, yeah, obviously, but people forget. Entrepreneurs forget it all the time. So the next time I started a business, which was the one I'm in now, Health Street, I made sure not to spend a dime that I didn't have to spend, absolutely have to spend, unless it was bringing in revenue. And then once I had the revenue, then add to it and go from there. Took the total opposite approach.
You're talking about straight from experience, right? Like you've
Yeah.
tried businesses, you've launched them, where all of a sudden you learned the hard way that you have to have a product or a service that people actually want to spend money on.
Yeah.
If someone out there has an interesting idea, how can they quickly figure out is this actually a legitimate business that people want to spend money on?
Yeah, so if you have a novel idea, right, that doesn't actually exist at all in the world, which is sort of, the fantasy of entrepreneurship, right? Because those are the ones that could potentially turn into billion-dollar unicorns and stuff. That's going to be harder to figure out, right? And people are afraid to share the idea. Somebody's going to steal it, and so those are more difficult. The ones where you have an idea about just doing a business that maybe you don't even yet have an innovation for. You just want to start something that exists in the world. And I think if you have the attitude that at some point you will hit upon an innovation once you understand the market and the product. But initially, just get that business going. I think that's a lot easier to test out because you just now have to have some presence, and there's already people searching for that product. And I think one of the things somebody told me once, when I was starting this particular company, I said, well, why would they use me when there's already all these other companies out there? I think I was asking a competitor, actually. And he said, why not? Go to someone and ask that. And people think that just because consumers are out there using a particular company that they're naturally loyal and they'll never change. But it's just not the case. Somebody will use you if you can get in front of them, or if you can be on search, right, or whatever you're doing to market yourself. And then you can learn that business, and of course, hopefully innovate and do the even more exciting parts of entrepreneurship as you go.
So the trick is honestly getting in front of people, right? If you're a unicorn, a brand new idea that doesn't exist yet, it's a little bit of a different path. But otherwise, it sounds to me like the trick is just getting in front of customers that already have an understanding of the business you're providing.
Right, and I think the barriers to entry is a big early decision point in how you pick a business, right? Because I used to run before I. In between my college years and when I started a business, I was working in corporations, right, and insurance companies, actually running healthcare insurance in New York and Chicago, and I always wanted to get back out on my own, right? But I used to say, well, to start an insurance company, you need millions in reserves. You need all kinds of regulatory approvals. You got to go out and build an entire network of on and on, right? So the barriers are huge. So to do something like that, and I think it's similar for a novel, unicorn type idea, right? It's going to take a lot of investment before you might actually be able to get in front of actual consumers. So you have to take a totally different approach when the barriers are high, because you might have to then seek out funding and, prove your idea to, get other believers in it before you actually get it out there. If the barriers are low, right, then you can actually get in front of people a lot quicker. And it all depends what type of business you want to run, and what type of life you want to have as a result of it.
I like that. The look for the low barrier to entry businesses. If you're a new entrepreneur, don't shoot for the moon or for the skies on your first one. It's like look for these low barrier to entry businesses. You don't need $1 million of funding to be able to get off the ground, start making sales. I think it's great. So
And,
tell us,
and
Jared, before. Sorry, go, give a thought for me.
I'm sorry. I was going to say the other benefit, if you choose that path, is more independence, right? Less reliance on investors and outside, But it all depends on what kind of product you want to do, and what type of business you want to run, what type of context and structure you want to have.
Tell us a little bit about Health Street, your current business. What are you all up to?
Yeah, so we're currently a employment screening app for, got about 20,000 active businesses using the app, and basically they're setting up drug testing and background checks and occupational health services all over the United States for the most part. And really, it's like if you think of Expedia, right? If you log in, put in a zip code where you're going to go, same kind of thing. They go in there, set up their testing, find clinics. It's like a clinic finder, but the whole process of, unlike Expedia, where they're just connecting you like a marketplace, we are managing the whole process. So we're connecting you to the lab, connecting texting the employee, let's say, or the job applicant, a barcode with the map to the clinic. They show up. It's texting the company that they've arrived, that the urine specimen has reached the lab. The lab has reported the results. Log in and get the result, that kind of thing. And we are companies managing thousands of employees for that employment screening services on that app.
Nice. So you're doing background checks, drug testing, DNA screening, even as well. So over what 20,000 different users. Um,
Yeah.
you know what's crazy
Yeah.
is that I know a little bit of the background of your story here. That I want to tell people that you're at this place today, right? A massive company, so many users. Tell us how it kind of got started in relation to what we were just talking about a low barrier to entry.
Yeah, so I guess we're I would very much describe it legitimately as a tech company. It's kind of a joke when I used to think when everybody says, what do you do? I got a tech company. We make toilet paper. But everybody's a tech company. But now I could legitimately say it's basically a tech play. But we really started very analog, and I had, like I said, I had done that business where I blew my life savings. I went back and got a job, left not on great terms, and I was kind of out of money. And here I go. I got to start another business. Last one failed, right? And basically, I bought a used RV, and I got training on how to become a trainer for drug testing and breathalyzers, so that I could hire people and train them, right, officially. So it was like very light investment, just my time, and just went out and tried to market it. We would drive up to factories and try to give out flyers, painted the RV so that people might call when they saw it, that sort of thing. And then over time I realized we had no office. I had one staff, and Megan, and she would say, "Hey, boss, where we working today?" I say, "Oh, meet me in Union Square." And she'd show up, and I open the laptop, and we would just work there. But I was also like marketing it at the same time. I figured like if we're working in some office somewhere, nobody knows we exist, but we might as well be marketing at the same time by painting the RV and parking in a busy location, right? So that's what we did. But I realized over time that the better, more scalable business was going to be through a call center. So we've opening a call center, and then over time realized even better and more scalable would be, having an app and having a website that could handle unlimited volume, that sort of thing.
Mm. But the whole business started. Health Street today, as you say, it's a tech business, 20,000 customers, users. You started from buying a used RV, painting
hmm
the side of it, and you all worked from inside doing, was it mostly DNA testing at that time?
So the original painting on the RV was advertised in the drug testing. I had a urine cup on the side, and didn't really get a lot of positive attention, I would say. But but we were doing DNA testing as well, and that for some reason we were getting a lot of calls for that. It was on our website. And so what I realized was, why leave this branding on where it's not necessarily attracting positive outcomes in terms of marketing. Let's paint so I had these graffiti artists up in the Bronx paint it with "Who's Your Daddy," right? And then that got massive attention. Like it went from no attention to massive attention overnight, to tell you the truth. And so while we're serving businesses, right, we're also doing private testing for DNA testing and some private drug testing as well.
You painted on the side of the RV. First, it was a little cup of pee for drug
Yep.
testing, and it was not getting positive, reviews. I'll say that. And then
Right.
you decided to paint on the side of it, "Who's your daddy?"
Right.
Where did this slogan idea come from, and what did it really achieve for you guys?
You know, where it came from, this funny thing with DNA, right? That it's the most dead serious thing in the world when it comes to relationships, right? I'm not talking about find out if I'm 20% Irish or something like that. It's like find out if this kid that I'm raising is actually my son or things like that, right? Really, most life altering, affecting children, most serious thing. On the strangely enough, it's also like it stokes like the humor bone somehow, right? And it's just so, even the people in the midst of these serious situations, if, this humor involved because it's I don't know why, right? So that slogan, it just came like talking in the office, hey, who's your daddy, like that kind of thing. And then it was like, all right, let's put it on the side. It was a little risky because I didn't really know if people would take it well, but man, it absolutely absolutely, people were jumping out of their houses taking pic, they'd see it coming. But I mean, it was nuts, and people were honking all the time. I would sit in the RV. I mean, my son was young at the time. We sit in Rockefeller Center sometimes and just watch people just come up and take pictures all day. And so then the pictures turned into obviously Instagram posts, which turned into, without me doing any of it, just you got a ton of social media just like that. And then New York Post came and Daily News, and then of course New York being the media capital of the world, basically, so we got a ton of media also based on that.
Wow. So it sounds by actually taking a risk. So you didn't know if it was going to be received well. By taking a risk, you ended up getting all this free marketing.
Yes. And I had come out of these corporate environments. I was a SVP for marketing and sales of this company, and I remember like thinking if I had presented this idea to the board meeting, where I needed approval, I mean they would never approve anything like that, right? But for $4,000 of paint and paying the artists, I got millions and millions in free. I mean, VH1 ended up making a show that was, I think they invested $5 million just in the show, right? Let alone the advertising and the PR that came out of it. So it was a calculated risk, and it could only have been taken in a sort of like entrepreneurial environment. It would never fly in a corporate environment.
That's so unfortunate. Like, why is that though? Why is it that corporations aren't willing to experiment and try things that can get so much attention?
Yeah, yeah. It's a danger for entrepreneurs too. You get addicted to what already works, right? And you don't want to risk that legacy business, right? And so, people talk about like a bet the business moment, but those are very hard and get a ton of pushback because everybody's counting on that paycheck and it's coming from something else and they don't want to upset that. So if it's a marketing tactic that could go wrong, and then the bigger the company, the more it's more about risk, right? What the C-suite is focused on oftentimes is risk mitigation, right? And that's way more important than trying something, that might just take off. So I think that's a big part of it.
Okay, so it's sounding to me like early stage businesses, right? A lot of our audience are younger entrepreneurs, early stage. It
Yeah.
sounds like that's the best time to take bigger risks before you're risking all your employees' paychecks.
Right. And if you think about it, if you don't have a ton of revenue coming in, you're just risking the cost of doing the what that in my case the $4,000, right? If you already had $5 million of revenue, you might not want to
Mm.
put the company at risk, right? So yeah, I think that's the case. It's not necessarily risking a ton of money, but it's doing something that might be a little wilder to try
Mm.
and catch some attention.
Yeah, I mean, this was definitely something pretty wild to catch attention. And even after you're doing it, I mean, you must have gotten so much judgment. Like, how did you handle judgment and even self-doubt from people that were closest to you?
Well, we took a vote in the office. I think I was outvoted like 10-1. If all the employees say you're crazy, you can't do that. And I think I just had the attitude like, I didn't start a business to do everything right and have the best, most expert people and every decision had to be. I did it for the experience, right? And I figured I'll get some things right, I'll get some things wrong, but either way, I'm gonna, learn and live, right? And fortunately, you can only do that if it's bringing in enough to pay for your living, right? To be able to live. But so I was in that situation. We were making enough money to live on, and I was okay with the chance that it might not work. I was more concerned if people got mad or something, like that kind of thing, because it's out there in the community. And fortunately, couple cases where people said, "Hey, I don't like that. It's wrong." So I moved it, but the vast majority, 98% of the time, we had real positive, and especially from the people that got tested, which meant the most to me because, they didn't mind it at all. It was kind of like laughing and joking on the outside, but once you got inside the RV, now we're being sensitive and serious and talking about the situation you got going on.
Mm. That's great. So even if there was a couple people that did criticize it, right, that were upset by it, you would simply move.
Yeah.
But it was the people that you were actually impacting. They're the ones that only mattered at the end of the day, huh?
Right. That's the way I looked at it, and they were in it. They had the actual experience of needing this type of service. So yeah, I mean, I didn't. I think I picked my daughter up at school once, and the principal came out and was like, "What is that truck? What are you doing in front of my school?" I was like, "Ooh, okay, maybe, maybe being in front of a school is not a great idea. Maybe it's more of an adult humor kind of a thing, right?" So I learned a little bit, but amazes me how some parts of the strategy was so simple, like having if you're in a truck and you have it out there, you might as well paint it, right? Like, might as well advertise in it. And where my office was, which is, if you know New York City, in the South Bronx, right at the bridge coming into Manhattan. So tens of thousands of commuters would pass this, and at the end of the day I'd leave the office and that spot on the edge of the bridge was always open. So I'd park it right there. And I'm telling you, to this day, 10 years later, people, "Oh, who's your daddy? I know that truck. It was by the Third Avenue Bridge. I used to pass it all the time." Like, people remembered it, years later. It's kind of, it's a simple idea, right? But people don't do it sometimes.
Sometimes the simplest ideas end up being the best. Right. So for you, it was a marketing play. For other people, it can be starting a brand new business. Right. Listeners, how can people overcome self doubt to actually start chasing
Mm.
their dreams and starting new businesses?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I think the, was referencing a little bit earlier, but the having actual data and logic, not just overcoming doubt. You have to do both, right? So and then the data and the logic, meaning a business plan, getting in front of customers, making that first sale, that can help you with the overcoming of the doubt, right? I do, personally, like I said, there's all different types of businesses and types of styles. Personally, the longer it takes me to get that feedback, that dopamine hit of a sale, right? The more time you're spending building something, developers do this all the time. They just keep building and oh, people are gonna want this, and then it never launches. To me, get that feedback, have it coming back, back at you. Not everybody's like that. I think if you're an author and you sit down to write a book, you don't get any feedback. Nothing comes back at you. And me personally, I tried that once and I couldn't last. I need something, some kind of reassurance that, hey, this is going in the right direction, because then I could also iterate and pivot and not just go off in a single direction and hope that it's the right one.
Nice. That is so good, Jared, right? So, two ways to overcome self doubt for new entrepreneurs is one, look at data, right? Not just your emotions. Is this a good business? But is this something that's actually needed? Are their customers theoretically lined up, ready to go? And the second one is I like this feedback loop. Get
Yeah.
feedback as often as possible to tell you that you're going in the right direction, not just keep iterating on new businesses or changing the app before ever getting any response from potential customers.
Right, right. It's a tricky one, because you, as an entrepreneur, as an innovator, you want to have it. You don't want to show somebody something that's not fully done, because you think, oh, if only it was done, they would have loved it, right? So but you have to constantly assess, what do they really need on day one to be able to test this out. The concept of MVP, right? And that sort of thing. It's so important in the earlier stages. Once it's an up and going concern, you can add features that are lighter and easier. You could say, all right, we're going to spend 3 months on a bigger feature, right? You could still get caught in the same problem, but you have a little more runway after that. But initially, you really don't. You got to get that view. And there's no feedback like a sale. Somebody saying, "Great, I loved it. Shake your hand. Pay for it. Tell you what. They just gonna you're gonna learn so much from that."
Absolutely. Take us back before Health Street. What were you working on that pushed you this direction?
Um, well, I was running the occupational health clinics, and we were doing tons of testing and a lot of drug tests. I mean, I think it was like 100,000 drug tests a year, and I saw from before that I had this marketing experience with RVs. Right, I was running fleets of RVs, doing marketing all over the city, and I was just putting together in my mind how could these kind of things come together. I understood that, for things like truck drivers, if they get in an accident, by law, by regulation, they have like 2 hours to get a breathalyzer. And I just started thinking about, how are they doing that? And I bet that that's a lot higher margin of a service, right? Because who's going out there at 3 in the morning doing that service, right? You could probably charge a lot more, or maybe you could get them on a monthly fee. I think another lesson there is like look for the hardest part of a business to get in, and because there's probably going to be less competition there. Maybe you can, elbow your way in, right? And maybe you can charge a little more and get better margins, right? And get some more loyal customers that way. So I had my phone on for about 9 years, 24/7, because we did, even when I had the office run, I had about 10 employees. There was nobody answering the phone overnight, and I would get up and take the calls. In the first several years, a lot of times get in the car and do the test myself, drive an hour, sometimes further, sleep in the car, come back in the morning, that kind of thing. And then other times, we built a network of these guys that did things like that all over the country. So then I would have them on my phone. I would get the call, say, all right, take the payment, and send them out. And just to give you an idea, like as opposed to doing a test during the day, it was probably 10 times more profitable, right? 10 times more revenue for one of these nighttime tests. And I got to do it. The phone rings, and I would wake up smiling. Now I think it's crazy. I don't want to stay sleeping, but when you're hungry, and it's great. So I think that's an important piece. Look, if you're in an existing business, look for the things that are the big guys that are already established don't necessarily want to do because it's harder, and there's going to be some room for you to sneak in there.
Wow. Look for the tougher problems to solve, right? The harder pieces to actually provide that service. That way, the businesses that are already standing, they don't really want to do that. And so if you're willing to do in the beginning, you can probably charge more for it also.
Yeah, yeah, yep. People the bigger company gets, the more comfortable they get, and the more addicted they get to the easy revenue. But the easy revenue is not easy to get initially, so they leave openings, right? So they leave openings for you to slide into these spots, and I think it's a good way to think about it.
I think that's a genius way to think about it. Right? They are leaving these openings. It's not going to be the easy road, right? But
Right.
man, like that's not the route to go. You think that too many entrepreneurs these days think that it's going to be easy and that they're going to become overnight successes?
Definitely, 100%. It is undoubtedly a very hard process, no matter what you do, right? And I have friends that actually became billionaires in entrepreneurship, and I have other friends that work for years and years and years, and that doesn't happen. And then even when things are going well, there are times, I could think of in the 15 years I've been running Health Street, maybe 3 or 4 times where something went really wrong, and it was 2 or 3 months of just really hard times because you're like, why did I make that change? Everything was going great, and you got to deal with those things. So it's, entrepreneurship. I'm sure your listeners are in this, listening because they want to be entrepreneurs or they already are, right? And so you have that mindset and you have that headset that the stress is going to happen, right? So dealing with those or with those things and getting through them is a big part of the game, right?
Yeah, it's a huge part of the game. It sounds like it's almost better to believe that it's going to be harder in the beginning versus
Yeah.
believing that it's not going to be that difficult. I have an amazing idea. It's going to blow up overnight.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you have an amazing idea and you can turn it into $1 billion overnight, God bless you. I just don't know how to do that. Like I can't imagine. Right? It's life is not like that. People don't just give you money. People don't just look at any ideas the same way you might think of it. It's brutal. It can be brutal, right? So one other word I'd like to think about a lot is just being relentless, right? So like, you know, if you have experience in your life where there was something that you could not do, but you worked so hard at it that you figured it out and you became good at it, whatever that thing is, right? You have to remember that and then apply that. So it could be just one little technical thing you're trying to conquer in your business, or it could be just the whole idea of the whole thing. But you know that you can do things that you otherwise previously couldn't do, or thought you couldn't do, or were told you couldn't do, and you overcame them. Those are the things to lean on. And how did you get there? Mostly probably through hard work and relentless effort. That's what it takes with entrepreneurship also.
Takes hard work and relentless effort. Man,
Yep.
that is the truth. Jared, a little while ago, you said, there were times when building Health Street that you would make a decision and things would go poorly for months at a time. Are there moments that you thought about totally giving up, and what stopped you?
Um, no, not in House Street, never. I think the I'll give you one example. We launched a new website at one point, and traffic went from whatever it was, 100 to 2, like overnight. And came home from the launch party with my new logo T-shirt and celebrated with the developers, and it was like, where's the traffic? What happened? Like,
Yeah.
and that took about 3 months to figure out what the cause was, what the error that the developer had made. And just rough 3 months, right? You like watching. The other thing with entrepreneurship is that it affects your personal life if you're relying on the income of the retained earnings as or profit for your salary, right? So it can have this crossover effect. And the time I had small kids and it's thinking about, do I can I buy them a holiday gift? Should I hold off? So it cuts across. So as an entrepreneur, you got to be prepared for that, because there's the highs are high and the higher, but the lows are lower, because in a regular job you might not have that crossover, but you also don't get the high of when you succeed, having it be yours, and that whole feeling of success.
So true. Jared, a quote of yours that I wrote down before the interview said, "The biggest opportunities arise from our darkest moments." Tell us a little bit about this.
Well, I don't know, maybe it comes from a movie I saw when I was young, where most of my good ideas came from at the time. But like, you looking into the abyss, and that's when you find your character, right? And it forces you, and when you have tough times, to uh, think of a way out, right? Think of doing things differently. If you're comfortable, you may not force yourself to do that. You might, ruminate on some ideas, but when you really have to, that's when oftentimes you're able to come up with these meaningful innovations that make a difference.
The meaningful innovations that make a difference. Man, if you were to think back on building Health Street, right? What's a memorable story that deeply changed you and deeply changed the business?
Mm. I think that, I guess the unfortunate side of the fact that businesses scale much better the more tech you get. It's the unfortunate part is that you get more removed from the people, right? So most of my favorite stories, and the ones that when the news media was hanging around, the ones they wanted to hear, were not necessarily the business stories, right? Because the business story, what makes the bank account get replenished every night, is really, not as glamorous. It's hard work and tech. But if you can tie yourself to the human part of it, And for me, it's thinking back on the, the more analog moments, interacting with people, with DNA testing, it was very emotional. I'll never forget a guy who had his son's face tattooed on his chest. He's got a 5-year-old son, and I forget why he got the test. I think his lawyer told him to get it. He was getting divorced or whatever, and the test showed he was not the father. And oh my God, the devastation, and at that moment, it was me and him in the room, and I realized, okay, how I react and how I explain this news, right? And the things I say matter, right? I didn't do the test. I didn't, but that part matters, And he was thankful to me and called me months later, and but at the time, it's like, you can't forget that. He's like, how am I gonna tell my father? Oh my God, like I could cry thinking about it, And it touches you as a person, as a man, with kids, you think things, and it's like, so connecting to the people, and then remembering those stories, so that when you are sitting in front of a spreadsheet for 8 hours doing, right, you got to think, I'm not just doing this. I'm not just doing the spreadsheet. I'm doing it because of the people, and hopefully you're running a ethical and good business that can potentially impact people positively.
Man, that's great, right? Remember the people that we're actually impacting, right? Moments like that I mean, your whole business, right? You're impacting people so much. You're deeply changing their lives, deeply affecting them, and thus it's deeply changing yours also, right? By giving these results, whether it is for background checks, drug testing for businesses, or DNA testing to see who the father is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are moments that you don't forget, and obviously drug use is a huge issue, and one of the things with job testing has been shown that that's sometimes guys will give up their family to stay on the drug. They're so addicted, but strangely, when a job says, "All right, you're fired," sometimes that's the straw that breaks the camel's back in terms of the addiction, because now they can't do anything, and it sounds crazy, right? But oftentimes that's what it is. So we try to remember that, right? We're not just here to catch people or anything. Oftentimes it's the test itself which is gonna hopefully turn people around. And we had a couple stories like that where people came back to us and told us that as well, testified to that concept.
Wow, these drug testing screenings are literally being life changing. Along those lines, right, Jared? Like, I like to talk about legacy a lot. And an individual like you, who is a lifelong entrepreneur running a super successful company, always gives me my favorite insights when it comes to legacy. Tell us, what does legacy even mean to you?
Well, I think life is about experience, right? And not just only, success, right? It's the
Mhm.
negatives as well as the positives. The successes are so much better if you've lived through some of the failures, right? Um, and I think ultimately what I would like to do, although I can't say like this is what I do every day, right? I have to run the business, but ultimately I would like for to be an example to others that want to do something, or are inspired somehow by that work. When I was working for larger companies, I had hundreds of staff, and it was more direct. I could impact. I could coach. I could promote from within, and teach people. Here's what you got to do for you do this for 6 months, and we get and then promote them. And then that feedback was amazing. It's great. As an entrepreneur, I got to watch every penny. Right, there I was spending somebody else's money, so I hire. Just had to convince them that it was a good idea, and it worked out. But when it's your own, you really much more careful about spending money like that. So there's less people. I have 11 staff, and so there's not as many opportunities to do that. But hopefully, we create enterprise value that turns it into something bigger, and I'd be able to impact people, and particularly people from backgrounds where they like I don't. My own feeling is, if there's plenty of people out there to teach the kids or the young entrepreneurs if they have come from backgrounds where they had education and money and examples in the neighborhood. So my own personal mission is to hopefully impact people that didn't have that, maybe from different places, inner city or rural or whatever.
Nice, nice. It's actually about impacting people, not just about making money, right? When did your perception change from being more about money to actually being directly impacting people?
I think I think when I was working at this larger company and I moved over from the analyst type of role, right, into managing staff that were doing marketing and out in the streets with this whole RV program and stuff like that, call center, right? I realized there was so many people. I think we had like 400, and I realized that I could just focus on them and not worry about the sort of the spreadsheet world, right, that I had been doing with this analysis because there was other people to do it. And as I said, if I just do that, I can really impact more people, right? And ultimately let certain parts of the business take care of themselves. And that was just very, very rewarding and growing people from within, getting their feedback, their respect, was just great. So, leaving there, I didn't want to just say, oh, now I'm just gonna, go to crank out the most dollars that I can. Obviously, I know I want to make money. I want the business to be successful, obviously, and you need to. Otherwise, you don't have a business and you can't impact anybody. So it's a requirement for the job. But I don't think that it needs to be, everything. What you're doing matters a lot, and there's plenty of time to become a huge corporation and forget all that. That'll happen maybe later, because that's what they all do. But when you're small, you have the ability to actually be unique and authentic and it not be criticized by your board of directors or your insurance company who says you can't do that.
Nice. Be unique, be authentic, focus less on just the data and spreadsheets and more on the actual people.
Yeah. Yep.
Nice. Jared. Love it, my friend. Thank you so much for sharing with us. Anybody out there that wants to learn more about you or about Health Street, where's the best place for them to go?
Health-street.net. That's the business, and you can find me on LinkedIn and those kind of things. But Health Street has a presence on all the social media.
Beautiful. Jared, thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much for having me, Wayne.
And there it is, everybody. I mean, Jared, dare I say, just reminded us that legacy isn't about playing it safe. It's about taking risks, staying true to your values, finding purpose even in the darkest of moments. Everybody that's listening, please just keep going. Don't give up. Here's a couple things that I noted that stood out to me. Sometimes your biggest failure sets you up for your biggest breakthroughs, right? Things that you don't expect to happen, but keep persevering, keep moving forward. Bold ideas, even the ones that people laugh at, can change your life and help thousands of other people. And real legacy, it's not about the money, it's about empowering people, removing stigmas, building something that's bigger than yourself. Thanks again for tuning in. If this conversation inspired you, please share it. Share with a friend, a family member, a colleague, a business partner. Share the episode. Help us keep growing Jared's brand and the legacy that he's leaving on this world, as well as help us to keep growing this show as well. Thank you, everybody. Until next time, you've been listening to Journey to Legacy, and I will see you soon.